And then I decided that I was going to cover this trial that was going on called it doesn't have a name. I mean, I guess like J20 is what people call used to refer to it, because the protest that was organized was January 20th, Inauguration Day for Donald Trump. And on that day, there were tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people in the streets of Washington, D.C., doing blockades, moving around peacefully, expressing their First Amendment rights, and preparing to show up the next day for the Women's March, which I believe was like one of the largest ever. There was an anti-capitalist bloc organized to take off from Logan Square at 11 a.m. This small march was perhaps 600 at its height, is what the U.S. Attorney has alleged. The anti-capitalist bloc is a loose affiliation of anarchists, communists, leftists generally, sometimes libertarians, like during Occupy. Went about 20, 25 blocks. And in that space, there were several windows smashed. A Starbucks, a McDonald's, Bank of America was smashed, a steakhouse had their windows smashed. So they organized a march, and the march was heavily policed from the beginning. And in fact, their march was heavily infiltrated from the beginning. There were at least, I've heard sources tell me, 6 Project Veritas undercover operatives who were in the room. We know that there were also Denver or Metropolitan Police Department undercover officers in the room, although they can't send more than 2 into a room, and if they do, they have to keep in eye contact, which makes it very difficult. So they tend to, in DC, the cops will only send in 1 who will keep handwritten notes and not record. So for the Metropolitan Police Department, it was sort of like, oh, now we have video recording of this meeting. And this meeting was in fact what was being used to prosecute several of the defendants who weren't actually arrested on the day of January 20th. There was some property destruction that day, including a limousine that was set on fire. An attempt was to set it on fire was done early in the morning when the march first went by. And second attempt was done later after the crowd was corralled, nearly 3 or 4 hours later, I believe, possibly 5. And at that point, it became a burning limousine and kind of emblematic of the coverage of the inauguration of Donald Trump. And so the police started to deploy munitions at the protesters at that point, and they doubled back, and they were surrounded and kettled, and then grenades were tossed into the kettle and knocking people over. The entire march that all of these defendants are being tried for ended in less than, I think the prosecution says 47 minutes was how long it took to corral them. In that time, over 100 Stinger grenades were deployed and several gallons of pepper spray. They were using this gun that the Metropolitan Police Department affectionately refers to as their super soaker, to douse down civilians, the crowd, anyone, indiscriminately. In fact, there were 234 people arrested, at least that we know of. There were probably undercover officers arrested, etc., as always happens when they do these mass arrests, which were actually outlawed by a law in 2003. And so this mass arrest incident occurred, and the people who were detained and later became defendants, they were held in the street, surrounded by riot police, and all the people of D.C. who had come to D.C. to protest against the inauguration of Donald Trump, they were held there in the street. I think the last were taken off, and it was already evening. So it was quite the scene, and in that scene, the limousine of Larry King was burned. It's interesting if you look at that video, because you see that the first person who strikes it is actually not someone in black bloc. They're in a green army with a bandana, with a red bandana. It's a very interesting moment for that whole prosecution. And the iconic nature of the burning limousine in front of the Washington Post building is kind of the trickster stuff that one would expect from, perhaps a group like Project
Veritas.
In fact, when the jury was being selected for the first trial, again and again, people said that they remembered the image of the burning limousine.